Let's start with Resident Evil 4 Remake. You know how remakes can sometimes feel like just a polished up version of the original? This one is so much more than that. Capcom managed to take one of the most beloved games in the series and elevate it in all the right ways. It's like they took everything that worked in 2005 and improved it without losing that magic. Honestly, if you're a fan of the original, you're going to be thrilled. First off, the graphics are stunning. You know how the original had that eerie, creepy vibe with its isolated village? Well, the remake takes that atmosphere to a whole new level. The foggy woods, the creepy lighting, it just feels so immersive. There were moments when I had to stop and just take in the environment. It's terrifying, but in a way that makes you want to explore every corner. Gameplay-wise, I was thrilled with how much smoother everything felt. Leon's movements are less stiff, and the gunplay, spot on. The combat has been reworked to feel more dynamic, especially when you're dodging and parrying enemies. Oh, and speaking of enemies, those Ganados are way more terrifying this time around. They're more aggressive, smarter, and honestly, I found myself sweating in some of those encounters, especially when you're dealing with hordes at once. I loved the tweaks they made to the characters too. Leon has more personality. He's still got those cheesy one-liners, but he feels more grounded. Ashley is no longer just the damsel in distress. She's actually helpful, and their dynamic adds to the story in a way that feels more natural. Next we have Cyberpunk 2077. I know it had a rocky start, but seriously, it's a totally different game now after all the updates. The world of Night City is just wow. I mean, if you love getting lost in a huge, neon-lit, gritty open world, this game is perfect. It feels alive, you know? The city's got this cyberpunk vibe down to a T. Dark alleys, giant holograms, futuristic cars, the whole Blade Runner kind of thing. And honestly, I love how the game doesn't shy away from showing the messier side of that world, like the clash of high-tech and low-life. V, the main character, is super customizable too. I spent way too much time tweaking my character at the start, like more than I'd care to admit. But it's fun to play with all the different builds, whether you want to go full-on hacker, cybernetic brawler, or sneaky assassin. Plus, the augmentations, dude, that's the coolest part. You can literally replace parts of your body with cybernetic enhancements. Who wouldn't want a built-in katana arm or optic implants? What's crazy is how the story can change depending on what you do. Like, the choices really feel like they matter. There was this one mission where I was trying to decide whether to help these corporate types or betray them, and man, I was stressing over it for days. I couldn't stop thinking, what if I made the wrong choice? But that's the fun of it. There's no right or wrong answer, just how you want to play it. I will say the driving can be a little wonky at times, but honestly, once you get used to it, it's not that bad. Plus, the city's so massive, it's fun just cruising around, taking in the sights. Next we have The Surge 2. I feel like it doesn't get enough credit, but I had such a good time with it. If you're into that whole Souls-like experience, but with a sci-fi twist, this game is exactly what you need. It takes that punishing, tactical combat formula and throws it into this futuristic, dystopian world, which is a super cool setting for this kind of gameplay. The thing that really hooked me was the combat. It's brutal, but in the best way. You're not just hacking and slashing mindlessly. You actually have to target specific limbs, which adds a whole new layer of strategy. I loved figuring out which part of an enemy I wanted to focus on. Do I go for the unarmored areas for an easy kill? Or do I try to chop off a limb to get some sweet gear? Every fight felt like a puzzle, and I never got tired of that. Jericho City has this gritty industrial feel to it. The world building is solid. There's this mix of high-tech and complete chaos, and as you explore, you find out more about what went wrong in this messed-up future. The city itself is pretty open, with tons of shortcuts and hidden paths, which made exploring feel rewarding. Plus, the verticality of the levels was cool. You're not just walking through corridors. You're jumping, climbing, and finding secret areas that connect back in smart ways. It had that same feeling as Dark Souls, in how the world loops back on itself. The story is pretty interesting too. You're kind of dropped into this mess without much context, and as you play, you slowly piece together what happened in Jericho City. Next we have Demon's Souls. The world of this game is jaw-dropping, especially in the remake for the PS5. You step into this dark, eerie kingdom of Boletaria, and right away, the atmosphere pulls you in. Each area has this unique vibe, from creepy, foggy swamps to towering castles and fiery caverns. One thing that really stands out in Demon's Souls is how it doesn't hold your hand at all. There's no big tutorial here, just you your sword, and the mystery of Boleteria. That might sound intimidating, but honestly, it's what makes this game so memorable. You're learning as you go, and every little discovery feels like a personal victory. And when you finally figure out a tricky pattern or beat a boss that felt impossible, that's one of the most satisfying feelings in gaming. And speaking of bosses, Demon's Souls has some of the best. Each one is unique, creepy, and requires you to stay on your toes and really study their moves. You'll probably get your butt kicked a few times, or a dozen times, but that's okay. It's all part of the fun. Each boss fight feels like a grand event. There's this tension in the air, and you're just waiting to see what insane move they're going to throw at you next. But when you finally bring one down, the victory feels so sweet, like you've just accomplished something epic. The game's mechanics are simple, but feel just right. It's not about flashy combos or crazy powers. It's about timing, patience, and learning from every mistake. Next we have The Witcher 3. It's one of those games that just sticks with you. I mean, where do you even start with a game like this? For me, it's the world, you know? Like when you're roaming through those dense forests or just riding Roach across a field at sunset. There's this vibe that's hard to describe. The world feels so alive, even if it's grim and full of monsters. And you know how in a lot of games, side quests are just filler? Not here. The Witcher 3's side quests feel just as important as the main story, if not sometimes more interesting. Like, you could be hunting down a werewolf one minute, and the next, you're getting involved in the political affairs of some random village. Every quest feels like it has its own little narrative arc. It's like playing through mini-stories, all packed into this huge world. One of my favorite things, though, is how the game handles monsters. It's not just about swinging your sword around. There's actual strategy involved. You read up on your target, learn its weaknesses, and prepare the right potions or oils before diving into battle. It really makes you feel like you're Geralt, this professional monster hunter who knows what he's doing. But it's not just about the scenery. The characters, man. You've got Ciri, Yennefer, Triss. They're so well written. Every time I made decisions in the game, I actually felt like they mattered. I mean, how often do you get that in games? Honestly, every time I play The Witcher 3, I catch something new. A bit of dialogue, a small detail in the environment. There's just so much packed into it. Next we have Metro Exodus. This game is something else. If you're into immersive worlds with deep storytelling, this one's going to grab you right from the start. I remember jumping in, and immediately I felt like I was actually there, trudging through the post-apocalyptic Russian wasteland, feeling every bit of that bleak yet oddly beautiful atmosphere. What's really cool about Metro Exodus is how it takes the series from the underground tunnels and opens it up to these massive open areas without losing that signature claustrophobic tension. You still get those tight, nerve-wracking moments where you're creeping through dark, creepy tunnels. But now, you also have these wide-open spaces that make you feel a sense of freedom and danger at the same time. There's something about walking through a desolate, snowy wasteland and then hearing the distant howl of a mutant that gets your heart racing. Artyom's journey is such an emotional one. He's not just trying to survive. He's out there searching for hope, for a place where humanity can rebuild. You can feel how much this means to him and his crew. That bond between them, especially with his wife Anna, really hit me. You're not just a lone wolf. You've got a family, a team that cares for each other, and that gives everything this extra layer of tension. You want to protect them, to keep them safe. You've got to constantly think about how you're using your resources. Do you craft more ammo, or do you focus on a new gas mask filter because the radiation's about to kill you? That balance adds a lot of strategy to the game. Next we have Ghost of Tsushima. From the moment you start playing, it just feels like you're stepping into this beautifully crafted world. The first thing that really grabbed me was the landscape. The island of Tsushima is stunning, with these rolling hills, forests, and temples scattered all around. And the way the wind guides you instead of using a mini-map, that was such a cool touch. It makes you feel like you're part of the world, not just playing a game. The combat is another thing that I couldn't stop thinking about. It's so fluid and satisfying. At first, I was a bit nervous because samurai combat can be tricky, but the way it's designed here feels so intuitive. You switch between stances depending on who you're fighting, and it just flows so well. Every sword fight feels like it has weight. There were times when I would stop and challenge a group of enemies to a standoff, just because it felt so epic. You literally feel like a samurai. Speaking of feeling like a samurai, The story really pulls you in. It's all about Jin Sakai and his struggle between upholding the samurai code and doing what needs to be done to save his people. It gets you thinking, you know? Like, what would you do in his shoes? Would you stick to the rules or adapt to survive? The game really leans into that inner conflict, and I found myself getting attached to Jin and the other characters, especially his uncle. The emotional moments hit hard. And let's not forget the duels. Oh man, the duels. Some of the most intense moments in the game for sure. You face off against these really skilled enemies, and it's just you, them, and your sword. Next we have Middle-earth: Shadow of War. It got a bit of a rough start, but honestly, deserved way more love than it got. Now, when it dropped back in 2017, the game had a lot of expectations riding on it because Shadow of Mordor was such a hit. And Shadow of War did a lot of things right, but there's no denying it also stirred up some serious controversy, which didn't help its case at launch. First, let's get the big elephant in the room out of the way. The microtransactions. Yep, that's where a lot of the initial hate came from. It was a single-player game, but Warner Bros. Thought, hey, let's toss in loot boxes and microtransactions. Gamers were not having it. Understandably, no one wants to feel like they're being nickeled and dimed in a story-driven experience. What's wild, though, is that they eventually removed the microtransactions completely. But by then, the damage had already been done. A lot of people had already written it off. And that's a real shame because, beyond all the controversy, Shadow of War had so much going for it. First off, that Nemesis system, still genius. I mean, creating rivalries with orcs who remember you, plot against you, or come back from the dead for revenge. It's such a unique mechanic that really makes every playthrough different. The world felt alive, chaotic, and personal, in a way most open-world games dream of achieving. Then, there's the scale of the game. They took what worked in Shadow of Mordor and just made it bigger. More fortresses to conquer, more regions to explore, and even more dynamic relationships with your followers and enemies. Next we have Kingdom Come: Deliverance. It's not your typical medieval RPG, and that's exactly what makes it so special. When I first started, I was blown away by how grounded it feels. You're not some chosen one or knight in shining armor. You're just Henry, a blacksmith's son. And that's one of the best things about it. The game doesn't hold your hand, and it really throws you into this unforgiving world of Bohemia. It's gritty, realistic, and refreshingly different from other RPGs that lean into fantasy. The realism in this game is next level. There's no magic or dragons here. Everything is based on actual historical events, and the attention to detail is crazy. The armor, the weapons, the way people live. It's all so authentic. And that extends to the gameplay, too. The combat system, for example, is super unique. It's not just about button mashing your way through fights. It's tactical, slow-paced, and takes a lot of practice to get right. Sword fighting, in particular, feels so different from any other game. It's all about timing, positioning, and strategy. You really need to pay attention to how your opponent moves. What I love about Kingdom Come: Deliverance is how immersive the world is. The landscape is stunning, and the towns and villages feel alive. You walk through the streets, and people are going about their daily routines. There's a sense that life continues, whether you're there or not. The historical accuracy is something else too. The game takes place during an actual period in history. You can tell they've poured so much effort into making everything feel as true to the time as possible. Next we have Helldivers 2. Now this game is a follow-up to the original Helldivers, which had a strong cult following. It's all about cooperative, top-down, tactical shooting, but with a pretty unique twist. It's brutally difficult. However, Helldivers 2 has gotten some hate for being too punishing, or for having gameplay mechanics that can feel overwhelming, especially for new players. One of the biggest complaints is how unforgiving it can be. Friendly fire is always on, which means you can accidentally or not so accidentally kill your teammates during missions. And believe me, this happens a lot. It's a game that forces you to be super careful. And not everyone is down for that level of intensity. The steep learning curve and lack of hand-holding also rubbed some players the wrong way, especially those who were expecting something more casual. Another thing that got some pushback was the game's structure. Missions can feel repetitive after a while, and if you're playing solo, the game is an entirely different experience, and not always in a good way. It's built around cooperative play, so going in alone can make it feel more frustrating than fun. But here's the thing. If you're into tactical shooters and have a squad to play with, Helldivers 2 is an absolute blast. The chaos that comes from trying to coordinate with your teammates while dodging enemy fire and calling in reinforcements makes for some seriously intense moments. The variety of weapons, gear, and strategies you can use makes each mission feel dynamic, and the constant threat of messing up keeps the tension high. Sure, it's tough, but that's also what makes it so satisfying. Next we have The Evil Within 2. If you've played the first one, you know it's already got that creepy, nightmarish vibe, but this sequel, it takes things to a whole new level. How it blends open-world elements with that tight, survival horror tension. You've got more freedom to explore this time, but it never feels too safe. Even in the open areas, there's this constant sense of dread, like something could jump out at you at any moment. And trust me, the game knows how to play with your nerves. The enemies in this game are wild. Some of the creature designs are just pure nightmare fuel, like that multi-limbed thing guardian. Still gives me the creeps just thinking about it. And don't even get me started on the bosses. Every encounter feels intense and nerve-wracking, especially since resources are still pretty scarce. You've got to be smart about when to fight and when to sneak around. The open areas give you more options for how to approach situations, which I really liked. Sometimes it felt satisfying to sneak by enemies unnoticed, and other times you'd have no choice but to go guns blazing. The game forces you to be adaptable. The story is solid too. It's got that psychological horror aspect that really messes with your head, but it also wraps up a lot of the loose ends from the first game in a satisfying way. And I've got to say, there are some twists in there that genuinely shocked me. It's not just about the scares. It's a good narrative experience too. And of course, the crafting system is back, so you can make your own ammo and gear, which really adds to that survival feel. Next we have Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This game is like every Star Wars fan's dream come to life. Seriously, if you've ever imagined wielding a lightsaber, dodging blaster shots, or facing off against terrifying Sith enemies, Fallen Order is the game for you. It just pulls you in and makes you feel like a Jedi in training, and it's just so much fun. This game takes you all over the Star Wars galaxy, from lush forests to crumbling ancient ruins and everything in between. Each planet has its own feel, its own mysteries, and its own set of enemies and challenges. There's this amazing sense of adventure as you move from planet to planet, uncovering secrets, exploring caves, and finding new paths. And the level design is a blast. It's got that classic Metroidvania vibe, where you keep discovering new abilities that let you access areas you couldn't reach before. You're constantly rewarded for exploring and backtracking, which just makes the whole journey so satisfying. Swinging a lightsaber in Fallen Order feels right. There's a weight to it, and when you deflect a blaster bolt back at a stormtrooper, pure joy. The combat strikes this perfect balance between fun and challenging. It's not button mashing. You actually have to time your attacks, parries, and dodges to succeed, which makes every encounter feel intense and meaningful. Plus, as you go along, you get to customize your lightsaber. You can pick different colors, hilts, and other parts to make it feel like your weapon, which is just such a cool touch. Fallen Order has an incredible story that feels like it could totally be its own Star Wars movie. Next we have Gears 5. Even if you're new to the Gears series, trust me, Gears 5 is an amazing place to jump in. It's got everything you'd want in a blockbuster game: great characters, intense firefights, and a world that's equal parts beautiful and brutal. The combat in Gears 5 feels incredibly smooth, and every gunfight has that intense, cover-based strategy that makes Gears so satisfying. Popping out from cover, landing that perfect headshot, or getting up close and personal with the Lancer's chainsaw never gets old. There's something just downright satisfying about how combat feels here. Each weapon has a unique kick to it, so you're never just mindlessly firing away. It's all about timing and positioning. Plus, with the addition of Jack, your handy little drone buddy, you get some new abilities that mix things up in fun ways. He can cloak you, zap enemies, and even fetch items, so he's a true lifesaver in tight spots. And let's take a second to appreciate the world. Gears 5 introduces these open-world sections where you can explore on this sweet vehicle called the Skiff. Just zipping across the snowy tundra or the desert sands is a vibe all on its own. The world feels alive and dynamic, with lots of cool, hidden places to discover. It's not exactly a fully open world, but it's enough to let you roam around and soak in the atmosphere, and it really breaks up the action nicely. You're not just going from one big fight to the next. You actually have time to breathe, explore, and take in some amazing views. The story here actually has some serious depth. Next we have Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition. This game is seriously underrated and deserves way more love. Imagine an open-world action game set in the bustling streets of Hong Kong, where you play as an undercover cop tangled up in the city's dangerous criminal underworld. It's like GTA, but with a unique twist that really sets it apart. And let's not forget the driving. Sleeping Dogs has some of the most fun driving mechanics out there. It's super arcadey, and you can do crazy stunts, hijack cars on the go, and even ram other cars off the road. There's something so satisfying about zooming through the city, dodging traffic, and knowing you can hop out at any time to start a fistfight. The city is alive with neon lights, crowded markets, and tons of little side activities that make it feel so authentic. You can go sing karaoke. Yes, karaoke. Try your luck at street races, or just cruise around and soak in the atmosphere. The developers did a fantastic job capturing the vibe of Hong Kong, and it's a city you actually want to explore. One of the best parts of Sleeping Dogs is the hand-to-hand combat. It's like a martial arts movie come to life. You're throwing punches, countering moves, and using your environment in the coolest ways. You can slam enemies into fish tanks, toss them off balconies, and even use random objects around you to gain the upper hand. So, if you're into action games with a great story and a city that feels alive and vibrant, Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition is absolutely worth checking out. Next we have Horizon Forbidden West. If you enjoyed Horizon Zero Dawn, or just love the idea of exploring a stunning post-apocalyptic world with robotic creatures, this game is everything. It takes what made the first game so special and cranks it up even further. First off, the world is absolutely breathtaking. We're talking lush forests, sweeping deserts, misty mountains, and mysterious ruins, all packed with color and life. Every time you step into a new area, it feels like you're on an epic journey, and you can just feel the love that went into designing this world. It's one of those games where you'll find yourself stopping just to admire the views. The combat is even more intense than before. You're still going up against these awesome robotic creatures, but this time, there's a lot more variety in how you can approach each encounter. You can try different strategies, depending on the creature type, use traps, experiment with elemental effects, or even override certain machines to turn them into allies. It makes every fight feel unique, especially since the machines have such varied designs and behaviors. Oh, and the underwater sections? They're gorgeous, and actually add a whole new layer to the game. Now, diving into lakes and exploring submerged ruins is part of the adventure, and it's so well done. It makes the world feel even bigger and more dynamic, because you're not just stuck on land anymore. Horizon Forbidden West is a perfect mix of action, exploration, and storytelling. It's one of those games where you can spend hours just getting lost in side quests and exploring. Next we have BioShock 2 Remastered. When people talk about the BioShock series, BioShock 2 sometimes gets a bit overshadowed by its big siblings, BioShock and BioShock Infinite. But you know what? BioShock 2 absolutely deserves its own spotlight. It's like discovering this hidden gem that's been sitting in plain sight the whole time. Every time you step into that murky, neon-lit world, it's like visiting a strange, haunted wonderland. Rapture's got that perfect mix of beauty and horror, like you're constantly amazed by how stunning the place is, but also can't shake off that creepy feeling. And here, in BioShock 2, you get to explore whole new parts of the city that you didn't see in the first game. It feels familiar, but also fresh, like revisiting an old dream and finding new details everywhere. But what really makes BioShock 2 stand out is the role you play. This time, you're not just any character, you're a Big Daddy. I mean, come on, how awesome is that? You get to stomp around in this massive diving suit, wield a freaking drill, and protect little sisters. And let me tell you, there's something really special about seeing Rapture from the perspective of a Big Daddy. You feel powerful, sure, but there's also a sense of responsibility that wasn't there before. It's a surprisingly emotional experience, and honestly, it hits harder than I expected. The combat feels smoother and more intense, especially since you can dual-wield your plasmids and weapons at the same time. So, if you want to shoot lightning with one hand while blasting enemies with a rivet gun in the other, go for it. Next we have Fallout London. Some people were quick to dismiss Fallout London just because it's a fan-made project. There's this unfair assumption that because it's not officially from Bethesda, it can't possibly be as good as a real Fallout game. And to be fair, fan projects can be hit or miss, but Fallout is seriously impressive. The team behind it went above and beyond, creating new factions, storylines, weapons, and even unique creatures inspired by British folklore. They've poured so much creativity into it that it really does feel like a genuine part of the Fallout world. It's set in a post-apocalyptic version of London, obviously, which is so refreshing for a Fallout game. We've spent so much time in the United States, it's just a whole new vibe to step into London and see how a totally different society and culture would handle the end of the world. And that's where Fallout London really shines. It brings this fresh, gritty British flavor to the Fallout universe. One of the coolest things about Fallout London is the factions. In classic Fallout style, you've got groups with their own twisted ideals and goals, but here, they're all inspired by British culture and history. There's this one faction that's essentially a throwback to medieval knights, and another one that feels like a punk rebellion straight out of the streets of London. It's so cool to see a Fallout take on British culture, and the factions feel unique and grounded, adding a whole new layer of immersion. Honestly, that's what makes Fallout London so exciting. It's different in the best ways, and it's exactly what the series needed. Next we have Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. If you're familiar with the Yakuza series, you already know you're in for something big, bold, and just a little over the top. This game picks up with our guy, Ichiban Kasuga, who's back for another round of absolute chaos, heartwarming moments, and more twists than you can count. And let me tell you, if you're ready for a journey that's equal parts action, drama, and pure hilarity, this one's going to hit the spot. What makes Infinite Wealth stand out is how it blends a serious story with some of the funniest, most bizarre side activities you'll ever see. One minute, you're dealing with intense, emotional scenes. The next, you're wrapped up in a totally ridiculous minigame, and you're laughing because it's so outrageous. It's like they managed to throw in every wild idea they could think of, and somehow it all works. And with Ichiban leading the way, every moment feels fresh and unpredictable. Now, the turn-based combat, it's back. And better than ever. The strategy side of things adds this fun layer to every battle, and it's packed with quirky moves that only a game like a Dragon could pull off. And if you've played the previous games, you'll notice the combat's even more refined here. It's still got that signature mix of outlandish attacks and strategic depth, which makes every fight feel epic and hilarious at the same time. But beyond the action, it's really about the characters. Ichiban is one of those protagonists who's impossible not to root for. He's got this mix of loyalty, optimism, and pure heart that makes him stand out. Infinite Wealth is a must-play. Next we have The Division 2. It's like someone took the best parts of a cover-based shooter, mashed them up with RPG elements, and then dropped it all into a beautifully detailed, post-apocalyptic Washington, D.C. So the setup is simple. The world's gone sideways, and it's your job to bring some order to the chaos. You're an agent of the Division, a group of super-trained operatives trying to hold everything together. But honestly, the real fun isn't in saving the day. It's in exploring, strategizing, and slowly building yourself into an unstoppable force of nature. The game is all about cover-based strategy here. Running into a fight, guns blazing? Yeah, good luck with that. Instead, you're ducking behind cars, flanking enemies, and figuring out how to use your gadgets to outsmart the other side. And those gadgets? Absolute lifesavers. Turrets, drones, seeker mines. You've got a whole arsenal of futuristic toys to mess with, and they're all ridiculously fun to use. The enemies aren't just bullet sponges either. They're smart. They'll flank you, use cover, and coordinate to take you down. There's a real sense of satisfaction when you clear an area because you earned it. Every firefight feels intense and rewarding, especially when you're playing with friends. Speaking of which, co-op is where this game truly shines. Rolling into a mission with your squad, calling out targets and covering each other's backs, it's peak teamwork. Plus, there's something hilarious about your buddy panicking over the comms while you're casually tossing a healing grenade their way. Next, we have Persona 5. Without spoiling anything, you play as a high school student with a secret double life. By day, you're navigating the trials and tribulations of school, classes, exams, and hanging out with your friends. But by night, you're a phantom thief, sneaking into mysterious realms to change hearts and fight evil. It's as cool as it sounds, trust me. The menus, the animations, even the transitions, everything feels like it was designed by someone with a passion for flair. Every little detail screams, we're going to make this look amazing, even if it's just a loading screen. And don't even get me started on the music. The jazzy soundtrack is the kind of thing you'll be humming for weeks after you play. And the gameplay. It's this perfect blend of turn-based combat and life simulation, and somehow it works beautifully. One moment you're strategizing in these gorgeous, surreal dungeons, pulling off stylish combos and unleashing your personas, which, by the way, are basically manifestations of your inner psyche. The next, you're deciding how to spend your free time. Do you study for your next exam, work a part-time job, or go out for ramen with your friends? The balance between these two sides of the game is just chef's kiss. What I love most, though, is how Persona 5 makes everything you do feel meaningful. Spending time with your friends, called confidants, isn't just fun, it also gives you bonuses in battle. Doing well in school or working a part-time job helps you build skills that open up even more opportunities. Even the smallest choices feel like they matter, and that's such a rare thing in games.